Lamed Beis Amid Aleph, the Mishnah. Second, okay. Somebody commits a Nazirus, and he goes to bring his animal, and he finds the animal was stolen. One second. If what happened was he became a Nazir and then his animal was stolen, so his Nazirus is still valid. Even though, let's say he's a poor person, he doesn't think he can actually afford to bring the karbonis again. It doesn't make a difference. And we'll have to explore this in more detail. This is called Noilad. We'll finish the mission, we'll talk about it a little bit more. However, let's say he thought he was banking on the fact that he had two karbonis in his sheds, and it turns out that those animals were stolen before he accepted Nazirus. Ein a Nazir is not a Nazir. Okay. This mistake, this was a mistake of Nacham, of media, of Madai. So there were people that accepted Nazirus outside of Israel. And then they came to the temple to bring the karbonis, and they found the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. He asked them, he said, had you known that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, would you have accepted Nazirus or not? So they said to him, we would not have accepted Nazirus because we would not have been able to have a conclusion. We wouldn't be able to end our Nazirus since we can't bring the karbonis. The Hitir Nacham Amadai, and Nacham Amadai permitted them to live their lives not as Nazirim. However, when the rabbis heard about it, they were not happy. They said, so if a guy committed a Nazirus before the temple was destroyed, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and then he finds out and he says, had I known, I would have never made a neder, that those are not valid Nadarim. I'm sorry, those Nazirus are valid. However, if the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and then he didn't hear about it yet, and then he made a neder, in that case the neder is valid. I'm sorry, in that case the Nazirus is not valid, and the rabbi can annul it. Let's just go through this a little bit here. What's the idea here? We spoke about in Adorim in more detail the concept of where is it? Charota and Noilad. Okay. It's hard to the difference here is not it's a very fine difference. It's not a very clear one. Noilad is something that occurs after you made an eder. So, for example, somebody stole your sacrifices. You didn't realize that. Now, obviously, that's sort of an unpredictable event. It's very hard to say, had I known that somebody would have stole my animals, I would never become a Nazir, because there's no way to know that somebody would steal your animals. It's not exactly a likely or practical event. However, a scenario of charota, where sort of a common situation comes, it wasn't expected. That is a scenario where you would end in a Nazirus. So something like an animal that's stolen or the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. There's no way to predict those things. It's not; they never occur to you to think about. The things that have happened after you made the neder, or after you made the Nazirus, and therefore, it does not invalidate the neder or Nazirus. However, one second. However, one second. One second. However, if on the other hand he made a neder, if it was charota, meaning something that could easily have happened, something that could have, within reason. So in that situation, the halacha is that one second. In that situation, the neder is not valid. If it's something that you could have thought about, or it was a reasonable possibility and you didn't expect, that would be a valid Nazirus. Okay, let me just make sure I have this right here. 1 second. Yeah. That at least is Taisus' explanation of how this works. Okay. Amar Rabba. So Rabba said as follows: Shatfu Rabbanon l'Rabbi Eliezer for ukmi b'shitasayu. The Rabbi. Now there's this question of noilad, some sort of unforeseen circumstance that happens afterwards. Initially, there was a debate. Paitzchem b'noilad. Rabbi Eliezer, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer held that noilad is a legitimate avenue to retroactively annul a neder. The Chachamim oisrim, and the rabbis say it's prohibited. Now, evidently in the Mishnah we don't bring Rabbi Eliezer. Evidently, Rabbi Eliezer changed his mind. Rabbi Eliezer agrees to the rabbis that noilad is not a valid way to undo a neder. V'amar Rava, and Rava said, "Afagav the Amar Rabbanon ein paischem b'noilad, aval paischem b'tnai noilad." Even though noilad itself is not a legitimate avenue to retroactively annul a neder, however, tnai noilad works. What does that mean? What is the condition of noilad? Heichidami, Amar lahain. They say to him as follows: Ilo asa inish v'amar lachain lechar beis hamikdash mi have an adrisim. In other words, I'm not regretting the fact that I can't bring my karbonos. I'm regretting the fact that had somebody come to me beforehand and told me the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, I would not have made a neder. 1 second. So therefore, according to Rava, in other words, the fact that the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed is not an avenue to permit a neder, because that's noilad. But a charot or regret would be, had somebody told me, then I would not have made a neder. That is a legitimate avenue. It's not easy to try to wrap a clear defining feature of this difference. I can't say I can fully understand the difference here, but what I would propose to you is as follows. And again, this is sort of my own theory. Would be something like the reason why you're retroactively annulling the neder has to be the reason has to be a reasoning of retroactive annulment. Something sort of that, had this event occurred before, had I known this beforehand, I would not have made a neder. The fact that I can't bring my karbonos is not a reason to annul a neder. It's more like, had I known that I wouldn't be able to bring your karbonos, then I would never have made a neder. That would be a legitimate avenue. According to Rava. Rava is sort of really blurring the lines here between noilad and between tnai noilad, which is sort of some type of charota, meaning, again, noilad, the fact that you say, well, look, now life is so difficult that I'm going to be a nazir for the rest of my life, that is not called noilad. However, what's called tnai noilad would be, had I had this information beforehand and I would have known that my life would have been so different, then I would never have made a neder. That's a legitimate avenue to annul a neder. And I can understand if you're not satisfied with this interpretation. Okay, I'm not sure I am myself either. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, if I was there at the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, I would have said as follows. Haksiv, the verse already alludes to the fact that the temple would be destroyed, and therefore it's not noilad. It's sort of a predictable event that could have, not predictable, but it's sort of a common event that could have been known to happen. How do we know this? Haksiv, the pasuk says, the pasuk in Eiv, I believe. 1 second, it's pasuk in Yirmiyah. Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Hema. He talks about 3 times the Beis Hamikdash. This is a reference to 3 Beis Hamikdashes, 3 temples, the first 2 of which would be destroyed, and the third, God willing, should be rebuilt speedily in our time. So clearly that indicates that the first 2 would be destroyed. So the Gemara says you're right. Obviously, everyone knew that it would be destroyed at some point. We know it would be destroyed. We know when it would be destroyed. Don't they know exactly when it would be destroyed? Vaksiv, Shvuayim Shivim. 7 times, 77-year cycles. The temple would be destroyed after 7 7-year cycles, 490 years. The second temple was 70 years of exile, of the years of Golus Bavel was 70 years. And then 420 years of the temple is a total of 490 years of 490 Shemitas. So therefore, it was quite predictable exactly when it was exactly when it would be destroyed. So Gemara says no, nobody knew exactly when it would be destroyed, and presumably these Nazirim, they didn't know they were small Nazirim, sort of like a month or so. So then, because they didn't think it was going to happen imminently, therefore it's considered sort of an unpredictable event. Okay, be that as it may. Okay, next Gemara. This Gemara we've seen previously, and we'll go through it again. Interesting. They were traveling on the road, and somebody they see somebody coming their direction again. So we have a group here of 6 people. Okay, and they see somebody in the distance. We'll call them Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehudah, Yisachar, and Zvulun. And they see it in the distance a person. One guy, the first guy, thinks it's Binyamin, his friend Binyamin. One second. Now, one of them is coming against them. So Taisus actually has in the Giras of the mission, Taisus says, Shisha Mahacham Adarach. So 6 people were walking on the road. Somebody's walking toward them. The first guy says, I should be a Nazir if this is so-and-so. If this is Binyamin. The next guy says, Shimon says, I'll be a Nazir if it's not Shimon. The third guy says, Hareini Nazir, she'echad mekem Nazir. I'll be a Nazir if one of you guys are a Nazir. The fourth guy says, Yehudah says, she'ein echad mekem Nazir. If none of you are a Nazir, I should be a Nazir. The fifth guy says, she'shnechem Nazirim, that you're both Nazirim. And the last guy says, she'kulchem Nazirim, that you're all Nazirim. Beshamai oimrim, kula Nazirim. Beshamai says, everybody's a Nazir. And that why is that? Because Beshamai holds, hekish toys have a heknish. Like we spoke about yesterday, if you make a mistake in making something hektish, it's still hektish. Beisil says, Ein Nazir, Elamish l'niskaimu dvorov. Beisil says he's not a Nazir, except Elamish l'niskaimu dvorov, only the one who's one second. It's changing here. Hold on a second. Yeah. 1 second. Yeah. In other words, only the ones that made true statements, those are the ones in Nazirim, the rest of them are not Nazirim, because their conditions were not fulfilled. Okay, the last one's very interesting. Verb Tarfin Aimer, Ein Echad Mehem Nazir, Ein Echad Mehem Nazir. This is the famous Reb Tarfin's opinion. Naziris El Lahaflaw. According to Reb Tarfin's opinion, Naziris must be a definitive statement. It must be definitive. What does definitive mean? An absolute statement. In other words, 6 people are working on the thing. The first guy says, if this is Binyamin, I should be a Nazir. Well, when does it become a Nazir? When he finds out it's Binyamin. It's not a definitive statement. There's no conditions. Conditions have to be instantly verifiable. If it's going to take time to verify, you're not a Nazir. And therefore, Tarfin says nobody is a Nazir. Okay. Next scenario. Here, Tia la'achurov. Binyamin was this fellow who one guy thinks is Binyamin, and one guy is convinced is not Binyamin. He turns around and runs away. So now we have a troubling situation. We had a suffix. We have a doubt now. Who's a Nazir? Because we don't know who the person was. He never came close enough to be able to be identified. Nobody is a Nazir. We'll explain this in the Gemara. Rabbi Shimon says, Yomer, he says, according to Rabbi Shimon, everybody is a Nazir suffix, because nobody knows what to do. So therefore, the halacha is that everybody is a suffix Nazir. Now, the problem with a suffix Nazir is that you can't bring karbonos, because maybe you're not a Nazir, and the carbon you're bringing is considered chulin ba'azara. You're bringing a non-sanctified animal because you're not really a Nazir. You can't bring a Nazir sacrifice if you're not a Nazir, and you can't bring it into the temple because maybe it's not a valid sacrifice. So what's the only way out? We spoke about this a little bit earlier in the Masechta, and we'll review it probably today shortly. So what's the solution? What do you need to do? If you can't bring the karbanis, you're effectively a forever Nazir. You're a Nazir who finishes Naziris, just can't bring the karbanis. So what's the solution? You say as follows: If I've already accepted a Naziris, then I'm a Nazir because of that. And if not, I'm accepting a Naziris of Nadava. So either way, you have a Naziris to bring. Either it's your second Naziris or it's your first Naziris, and therefore the sacrifice is able to be brought. Again, according to the first opinion, you're not a Nazir. And we'll explain that shortly. Okay. Now the Mishnah says, according to Beis Hill, the one whose condition was not fulfilled becomes a Nazir, which makes very little sense. According to Beis Shammai says hektish toys, you make a mistake in accepting a Nazirus, have a hektish. You're a Nazir anyway. So therefore, if you made a t'nai, if you made a condition, and the condition was either was or wasn't validated, you're still a Nazir. Doesn't make a difference. However, according to the opinion of Beis Hill, who's a Nazir? Whoever's condition was not fulfilled, which makes very little sense. It's whoever's condition was fulfilled. Those are the people that become Nazirim. So that's the Gemara's question. We're on the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Beis, second to last line of the Gemara. Mishlin is Kaimud Varov. I might have a Nazir. Why exactly is he a Nazir? Rabbi Yehudah says, Ema Mishin is Kaimud Varov. It means somebody who actually the condition was fulfilled. Abaya says, Kingdom to Amar. One second here. Let me just make it 1 second. Okay, so I'm just going to read from Taisis's version here. It's interesting. Okay, I'll finish the Gemara. I'll explain something. Okay, so Abaya says, "Going to Amar." It's a scenario where he said, "Inami lav ploini who I have a nazir. Umaylan is gomer dvar for rishonim, el dvar v'achronim." So Beis Hill is saying what Beis Hill effectively is saying, and obviously anyone whose condition is fulfilled is a nazir, and even anyone whose condition was not fulfilled, if they accept it to become a nazir, even if their condition is not fulfilled afterwards, then they become a nazir. Okay, it's interesting. We'll soon turn the page. Lamed Gimel Amud Beis has no Gemara. It's just Taisvis. And what's interesting here is that the parak began on Daf Lamed Amud Beis, and the Taisvis from Lamed Amud Beis up until and including Lamed Daled Amud Aleph are basically all on Lamed Gimel Amud Beis. So the Taisvis of the past 3 blots that was on the page was just on the Mishnayos. The Taisvis on the Gemara begins in Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph and it continues. It's the entirety of Lamed Gimel Amud Beis. So it's not like there's a lot of Taisis on the next 2 lines that we're going to learn. There's actually very little Taisis on it. It's just the Taisis on Amud Beis is the Taisis of the past 3 blots. Okay, this is interesting daf. Okay, let's just finish until the Mishnah and then we'll stop. Okay, if the guy turns around and he disappears, so nobody knows who he is, he's not a Nazir. And again, we have a debate here. According to the first opinion, you're not a Nazir. According to the second opinion, that's the opinion of Reb Shimon, everybody is a Suffolk Nazir. So therefore, everybody has to make the statement, effectively accepting Nazirus regardless of whether they were a Nazir initially or not. Okay. So the Gemara says, Hold on. Hold on a second. One second. Okay. So the guy the reasoning is because he turns around. Come on, but let's say he came and we saw him have a nazir, then everybody is appropriately a nazir. Mani, who is this? Elaim or Tarfin, we have a nazir. Okay, meaning. So we have the 6 people. Each one makes the same. First guy says if he's a nazir, if he's binyamin, I'm a nazir. Second guy says if he's not binyamin, I'm a nazir. Second guy, if one of you are a nazir. Second guy, if both of you are a nazir, etc. Whatever the Mishnah says. Now, the second half of the Mishnah evidently goes with the opinion of Beis Hill, because the Mishnah says that if he comes, in other words, if he turns around and runs, nobody's a nazir. But if he comes, then whoever appropriately should be nazir is a nazir. Obviously, it's not the opinion of Reb Tarfon, because Reb Tarfon says no t'nai in nazirus. Every nazirus has got to be definitive. Clearly not Reb Tarfon. We have a nazir. According to Reb Tarfon, if we don't know who he is, then because we don't know, because the condition cannot be instantly verified, so therefore you're not a nazir. Vatanya we learned Rabbi Yehudah Reb Tarfon The opinion of Reb Tarfon is you need a definitive nazirus. Now, obviously, this is going according to Beis Shammai and Beis Hill respectively. not Reb Tarfon. Okay. So whose opinion is this? Ela Rabbi Yehudah Dekrihu. This is the famous Rabbi Yehudah. We must have seen this Rabbi Yehudah at least 3 times before in this Masechta. Rabbi Yehudah of Kri. Yatanya. What's the story? Hareini Nazar Mashi Hey B'Kri Hazeh Me'akor. So the guy sees a huge pile of snow. He says, if there is enough snow in here to make 100 snowmen, then I should be a Nazir. This scenario is actually a scenario of wheat. Okay, same thing. Okay, what happens? By the time he gets there, all the snow melted. Or the the wheat was stolen or it was lost. So Reb Shimon says everybody's a Nazir. The guy's a Nazir because it's a suffix. He's a suffix Nazir. And then he has to do the suffix Nazir game. If I'm a Nazir because I accepted Nazirus, then I'm a Nazir. And if not, then I'm accepting a second Nazirus, which is actually my only Nazirus. Okay, Rabbi Yehudah says it's permitted. The reasoning of Rabbi Yehudah, which we saw a few times, is that Rabbi Yehudah says nobody wants to be in a situation where they're stuck. In other words, if you're a Nazir and you can't bring your korbanos because you can't bring potentially chulin into the Azara, into the temple, so therefore you would have never made a Nazirus. And therefore, any time you make a Nazirus that puts you in a situation of suffix, of doubt, you're not a Nazir. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah. Okay. So the Gemara says, Reb Shimon Savar Kilin. One second. Reb Shimon Savar Kilin the Ilolay Nignav Dilma Havabe Me'akor V'Hava Nazir Hashtanami Hava Nazir. Hold on. Reb Shimon Savar Kilin the Ilolay Nignav Dilma Havabe Me'akor V'Hava Nazir Hashtanami Hava Nazir. Reb Shimon says as follows: since had it not been stolen, maybe there were 100 measurements inside, and he's a Nazir. Hashtanami have a Nazir, so now he's a Nazir in a situation of suffix. V'achanami kivan di also kamami adina deploy have a Nazir. Hashtanami have a Nazir. And Rav Shimon says the same idea. Since had the guy come and we knew that it was Binyamin, many of them would be Nazirim, or it wasn't Binyamin, they'd be Nazirim. So now as well they become a Nazir. Okay. Okay, we'll continue the Mishnah. You know what? Maybe I should just hold on a second. All right. We'll do the Mishnah. I'll give a brief introduction about a concept that we'll see tomorrow, and hopefully that will make tomorrow a little quicker, because there is a little bit of a difficult Gemara tomorrow. Okay. So let's begin. Let's see the Mishnah. Okay. This is okay. Yeah. So talking about an animal, the unicorn of Talmud. Okay. Roas hakvi. He sees a kvi. Some people pronounce kvi as koi. It's not referring to a Japanese fish. Okay, what is a kvi or a koi? I call it a kvi, but some people call it a koi. Okay, whatever it is. What is this? This is an animal. I don't exactly know what species it is, but I'm not sure ArtScroll knows either. It is an animal that we're not sure whether it is considered a wild animal or a domesticated animal. There's a different set of rules for wild animals and domesticated animals. Most specifically, the laws of Kisei Hadam. When a wild animal is slaughtered or chicken slaughtered, there's a biblical requirement to cover the blood. This is not the case. Domesticated animals, it is a rabbinical requirement. Additionally, the other difference is, hold on. Second. There's a second difference as well, I believe. Can't remember the second difference. There's a few other differences. Which status it has. So they have this kvi comes into town, and you have 9 people set up here. The first guy says, "V'amar hareini nazir shezechaya." The first fellow says, "I'll be a nazir if this is a wild animal." The second guy says, "Hareini nazir shezechaya." I should be a nazir if it's not a wild animal. The third guy says, Hareini Nazir shezeh behema. I should be a Nazir if this is a domesticated animal. The fourth guy says, Hareini Nazir she'ein ze behema. I should be a Nazir if it's not an animal and not a domesticated animal. The fifth guy says, Hareini Nazir shezeh chai ubehema. He says, I should be a Nazir if this is both a wild and a domesticated animal. The sixth guy says, Hareini Nazir she'einza loy chayav loy behema. I should be a Nazir if this is neither a domesticated animal nor a wild animal. Mr. 7 or Mrs. 7 says, Hareini Nazir she'echad mekem Nazir. I should be a Nazir if any one of you are Nazirim. Okay. Eighth person, Hareini Nazir she'ein echad mekem Nazir. I should be a Nazir if none of you are Nazirim. And the last guy, the ninth guy says, Hareini Nazir shekulchem Nazirim. I should be a Nazir if you're all Nazirim. Harei kulan Nazirim, they're all considered a Nazir. Okay, just give me a moment here. Hold on. Okay, so now there's two versions here in Tosfos of how to learn this Gemara, how to learn this Mishnayos. We'll go with the first explanation here. This is obviously a restatement of the opinion of Beis Hillel and of Reb Shimon, meaning this is a question of doubt. What's unique to this situation is this is an unresolvable doubt. There is no way to get the answer to this question. We'll have to wait till Eliyahu Hanavi comes and tells us the answer. This is sort of this question goes back into the Mishnayos and Masechtas Klayim. There's a famous machlokes over there, but regardless, nobody knows what it is. So you're sort of you have an irreconcilable problem and you're seeking a definitive answer. Because the definitive answer meaning, are you a Nazir or are you not a Nazir? And you set yourself up with a problem that nobody will ever be able to answer. So the chiddush here is that even Reb Shimon, again, typically, until now we saw as follows. Reb Shimon says that there's this big pile of wheat. The guy says, if there's 100 measurements, I should be a Nazir. Now, had the pile of wheat been there, we would have measured 100 measurements. If there were 100 measurements, he would be a Nazir. If not, he would not be a Nazir. Now the pile was burnt, so now he's a Nazir misafek, according to Reb Shimon. However, in this scenario, there's no solution. You have the kvi in front of you, or the koi. There's no way to solve the problem. And Reb Shimon still holds that everybody's considered a Safek Nazir. Okay, and therefore everybody is a Nazir. Okay, we'll leave it at here for the Gemara. We'll see the last Gemara. It's short Gemara. We'll see it tomorrow. Okay, let's go the brief introduction. I still have to see the Gemara a little better, but just a few concepts for tomorrow. Okay. If anyone says the full karbonos between the brachas in the morning and Pesukei Zimra, Baruch Shamar, the last portion of that is a paragraph called Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Rabbi Shmuel gives the 13 hermeneutic exegetical principles. There are 13 ways that the Torah is explained. Among those ways are three specifically that we'll focus on. Prat uklal, klal uprat, klal uprat uklal. What does that mean? You have very often, okay. 1 second. First thing to point out here is that there is a significant debate whether the rule is prat uklal, klal uprat, prat. So again, the first rule is klal uprat, then prat uklal. A klal is a general rule. A prat is a specific. So klal uprat is a general rule followed by a specific rule. Then you have prat uklal, a specific rule followed by a generalization. And then you have prat uklal prat, a specific rule, a general rule, and then a specific rule again. There are many different examples of this throughout Talmud. Regardless, there is another opinion that has a completely different way of interpreting the same concept. It's called riboy and miyut. Riboy sort of means an inclusion. Miyut is a specification, very similar to klal prat. A klal is a generalization. A prat is very specific. So we have a rule of generic terms and specific terms. In the other version, we don't really use generic and specific. We say something more like more inclusive or less inclusive. So you see, it's a little more gray. If I may, it's a more inclusive category. Okay, so the prat or klal are very specific. Either something is a general statement, which refers to an entire spectrum, or it's a very specific statement. It refers to a very specific item. We'll soon see God willing, tomorrow we'll see that the example the Gemara we'll talk about is that a Nazir is prohibited to drink wine. But the Torah gives a number of specific examples of wine. So you can give sort of a broad, anything that comes out of a grape tree, or you could say grapes, dried grapes, pits. These are all specifications of very specific things. The generalization would be yotzei min hagefen, anything that comes out of a vine. So in this paradigm, a klal is generic, a prat is very specific. So for example, if you have a klal, a generic term followed by a prat, the law of Rabbi Shmuel says, ein bechlal alamash prat. The generalization includes only the specified categories. If you have prat uklal, you have a specific, and then the Torah generalizes. So then we say it has to be somewhat similar to the specific category. We make sort of an umbrella categorization. And then we get to prat uklal prat, which we'll see more details on tomorrow, which is you have a specification, a general category, and the Torah specifies again. You have this by a number of different things. So for example, the Torah says you own a slave, you free him, you give him gifts. The Torah gives specific gifts. Then the Torah says give generic gifts, and the Torah gives again examples of specific gifts. That's called prat uklal. It's the opposite. It's klal prat uklal. So it'd be a generic term of gifts, a concluding term of gifts, but in the middle there's specific examples. Okay, and we'll get to the specifics of Nazir tomorrow. What exactly the Torah says. Okay, that is the halacha of how we accept this tradition. Again, so this is a tradition Moshe Rabbeinu accepted, that this is how the Torah is interpreted. What happens in the Torah has a statement of generalizations and specifications. We have a set of rules how to deal with it. If the generalization comes first, that's not so important. Okay. Now, there is another version of a very similar concept, which is called ribuy umiyat. Ribuy umiyat is, again, it's the same idea, sort of, where you have generalization specifications, but it's not as binary. It's sort of more inclusive or less inclusive. So ribuy means more. It's a more inclusive term. And you have miyut means a less inclusive term, more specific. But it doesn't mean a specific term. It means a more specific term. So in the version of ribuy umiyat, it's exactly the same reference. So you're using the same words. In other words, you're going to have the Torah gives a specification. Instead of saying that pits of grape seeds are a prat, a specification will say that grape seeds are a less inclusive term than the word grape, which is a more inclusive term. Grape not referring to the actual grape, but referring to the plant, the vine. In that version, we have a more, in the version of ribuy umiyat, so because we talk about things in more or less inclusive terms, it tends to be a more inclusive category. It tends to include much more things. Okay, and tomorrow, God willing, we'll discuss this, how it pertains to the laws of Nazir, but very specifically to the law of a Nazir drinking wine. It's not just wine, it's anything that comes out of a grape. And we'll get to that tomorrow. So the Torah again frames this in specific and generic terms, or if you go with the other opinion, you'd say more inclusive and less inclusive terms. And we'll try to use that to understand how certain categories are included and certain categories are not included. Okay, and that will be the end of tomorrow. Middle of tomorrow. Stop here. Okay, have